What is up, my historians? This is Unit 5 Review, Part 2, 1844 to 1877, 13% of our exam. Now, overview, like we said, we have Mexican-American War, new territory, rising sectionalism, then we have the secession of southern states, we have Civil War, Reconstruction, and then that is where our unit ends. Alright, let's start off with Native Americans. Now you need to know that as we spread west, there's going to be a lot of conflicts with the Native Americans living there. A couple good examples. We have the Sand Creek Massacre of 1867. And what happens here is Colorado settlers are going to come across a bunch of Native Americans that they want off their land, or rather, they want to take their land. And so these settlers are going to kill more than 100 of these Native Americans. Among them are women and children. So that is a good example of the conflict out west. Another thing you should definitely know is the Great Sioux War. Gold is going to be discovered in the Black Hills, and the U.S. wants that gold, so they're going to go to war with the Sioux, which is a tribe, and obviously they're allies. In that war, we have the Battle of Little Big Run, which includes Custer's last stand, where the Native Americans have a victory against Custer and his American unit, and they're going to kill a bunch of Americans, and that is going to increase anti-Native sentiment in these settlers. Now, we also have two kind of opposing ideas about what to do with the Native Americans in the new United States territory. One idea is assimilation. So this is kidnapping kids from tribal areas and forcing them into boarding schools where you teach them Christianity, you don't let them speak their native language, you essentially erase their culture and assimilate them into American culture is the goal. And kind of the other side of the coin is the reservation system, which you guys know is these little red pieces of land are reservations. The idea is you kick natives off of the land that you want and you put them into areas that you don't want, okay? So all this red area is not good land, and they're going to give these natives, they're going to kick these natives out of their homeland and put them in the worst pieces of land they can find. We also get the passage of the 14th Amendment, which gives citizenship to African Americans. Now, in that 14th Amendment, they're going to leave out Native Americans, so Native Americans still aren't citizens at this time. They do that so they can still declare war on natives and still take their land, so know that too for the 14th Amendment. What is happening with women in Unit 5? We have a continued women's right movement, okay? We still have Susan B. Anthony, we still have Elizabeth Stanton fighting for women to get the right to vote. Suffragettes is what they are called. But interestingly, during this unit, we are going to get blacks the right to vote. And these women's rights activists are going to be opposed to that. Now, it's not because they don't like African Americans, it's because the law is going to say that all black men will be allowed to vote and not black women. So we see women continuing in this unit to fight for the right to vote, and Americans are not remembering the ladies. Now, obviously, African Americans are going to be a huge part of this unit. You should know, now we're talking pre-Civil War here, you should know about Harriet Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin, published in 1852. This novel depicts what life is like for a slave, and it is going to spread abolitionism through the northern states. We also see the U.S. continue to put band-aids on the issue of slavery. If you remember, last unit, we had the Missouri Compromise, okay? And that said Missouri would enter as a slave state, Maine would enter as a free state, and we would slap this magical line where no more slavery would spread into these northern territories, which are soon to be states. Now, Compromise of 1850 is going to throw that out the window, okay? First off, it's going to enter California as a free state, which obviously ignores that magic line. It's also going to allow these new territories, Utah, New Mexico, to decide through popular sovereignty or through voting if they want to be slave states or not, which is again ignoring that magic line. It's also going to ban slave trade in Washington, D.C. here. So they used to buy and sell slaves in our capital, which is kind of embarrassing when you have ambassadors from France or Russia or Britain coming to our country and you have slave auctions going on, and they can see that, so they ban that in D.C. They're also going to pass a new Fugitive Slave Act, and this is a very strict law that says if any slaves leave these slave states down here and flee into a free state, the northern states have to capture them and return them to those southern states. So this is basically saying that slaves can no longer run up to the north to gain freedom because they will be shipped back. Now it's important to know a lot of northern states are simply going to ignore that Fugitive Slave Act, but they try to get that locked down with this compromise. Now, a few short years later, the Kansas-Nebraska Act is going to be passed. And what this says is this used to be unorganized territory is going to be split into two pieces, Kansas and Nebraska, and they say that popular sovereignty will be the decision. So once again, the citizens get to vote. This is going to lead to two things. Number one, the Republican Party is going to be formed, and their whole base is no expansion of slavery into new territories. So we see these guys kind of replacing the Whig Party with the slavery as the big issue. We also get Bleeding Kansas, okay? So when these territories are decided, they get to vote on who is going, or if they're going to be a slave or free state. We see a bunch of Southerners and Northerners rush into Kansas and try to boost the vote for their side. And we see kind of a beta civil war where fighting breaks out. You have John Brown, who's actually going to murder a bunch of Southerners in their sleep here in Kansas, but it's like an early kind of like version of the Civil War we see in Kansas. You should know about the Dred Scott versus Sanford case, 1857, and that decision basically says that slavers can take their slaves anywhere in America, and those slaves will remain slaves, meaning if you are in North Carolina, you can take your slaves up to Ohio and stay there for 10 years, and those people are still your slaves, still your property, which basically means that slavery can now go anywhere. So this is really another, you can see through all these things, the rising tension and sectionalism between abolitionists, North and South, okay? We also have John Brown's raid at Harper's Ferry. So John Brown is this crazy bearded dude who is going to lead a slave revolt. John Brown is white, by the way, but he is going to get a bunch of African Americans. They're going to go to Harper's Ferry. They're going to try to steal a bunch of guns from the U.S. government. And it fails, okay? John Brown and most of his followers are going to die in that raid. But it's important because the South goes, oh no, I guess the Northerners are willing to invade our states. They get very frightened by this because they don't know if John Brown is an anomaly or if this is going to be the new normal of Northerners going to fight Southerners. So again, rising sectionalism and tension. We also have the Reconstruction Amendments, which you definitely need to know, okay? The 13th is going to abolish slavery. Go check out Kanye's tweet where he says we should get rid of the 13th Amendment. Interesting idea there. But this is going to abolish slavery in all of the United States. Now, I put this X here as an indicator that it does not work. We still have the new system of sharecropping in the South, where a plantation owner will rent out a piece of land to his former slaves, and they will get stuck in a debt cycle, and they will basically be slaves once again. We also have the Black Codes passed, which is going to outlaw vagrancy. So we see that blacks will be arrested for not having a job, and then they will be rented out. The prisoners will be rented out to do labor. So it's basically slavery 2.0. Now we have the 14th Amendment, which is going to give citizenship to blacks, equal protection under the law. Now this is going to be ignored again because of Jim Crow laws, which we'll get to with Plessy versus Ferguson. That's next unit, but just know that it's going to get ignored in the South with segregation and things like that. We have the 15th, which is black suffrage, what the female suffragettes are so upset about, okay? This gives blacks the right to vote. But again, the South is going to pass things like literacy tests, so you need to be able to read to vote. They're going to pass poll taxes where you have to pay to vote. And obviously, with sharecropping and black codes, African Americans cannot afford to pay these poll taxes. Now, they do have a grandfather clause where they say if your granddaddy could vote, then you can too, meaning that all those whites that can't read or pay the tax can still vote, but blacks cannot, okay? So they essentially ignore that 15th Amendment. And all these things, ignoring these amendments, happen essentially under Johnson, and he allows all these things to go down. Another thing to note, African Americans, there's something called the Great Migration of African Americans, where due to these conditions, they're going to start moving up into the cities of the North, kind of going a little west too. You can see Chicago, St. Louis, all these areas, they're going to flee up there in this great migration of African Americans. Now, what about immigrants and foreigners in Unit 5? The Irish potato famine is going to continue, and so Irish people are going to be moving to America in great numbers. Most of these guys are going to the north to work in industrial jobs, so that's where Irish folk are going. Now, Germans are also going to start moving to America. Germany isn't a country yet, okay? It's an ethnicity, but Germans are still going to come to America in mass numbers. These guys are not going to go into the north. They're going to be heading out west to be homesteaders, okay? So they go mostly out west. They're also very diverse, so we have Jews, Catholics, Protestants, all different types of religions and ethnicities coming in from what will eventually be Germany. We also have Chinese immigration in the West starting to kick off with the building of those railroads. Chinese labor will be very sought after. We'll cover that in the next unit as well. The Chinese are going to start moving west. And all these new immigrants are going to lead to nativism. The idea that you need to keep American culture pure, whatever American culture is, because it's all a mix of immigrants, but oh well, okay? These guys want to keep, they want to keep immigrants out of America. They think that the Irish and the Germans are just drunk, kind of sub-cultural compared to Americans, and they do not like them. There is economic reasons. They think that these immigrants are taking their jobs, a classic anti-immigration sentiment there. They also form what is called the Know Nothing Party, which is an anti-immigration political party. And I'm not kidding, these guys also call themselves the Native American Party, confusingly enough. But yeah, that is an anti-immigration movement that is happening at this time. It is time for technology, culture, and reform. Now again, I want to talk about sectionalism developing in culture, okay? In the South, we have this antebellum culture where they see slavery as a positive good. They think that they're providing slaves with a way of life. They're providing them with civilization, in air quotes, and education. And they believe that blacks could not do this on their own. So they see slavery as a positive good. We also see, now this is post-Civil War, we see the Ku Klux Klan, their first iteration, where they dress like this here, and that is all based on terror to scare African Americans, and so that happens after the Civil War, the rise of the KKK. We also see pre-Civil War that states' rights are a big part of Southern culture. Okay, they have this idea of nullification, going back to that nullification crisis, where they say that they don't have to listen to demands from the federal government. Now, with the Northern culture, we are going to see abolitionist movements expanding in the North with Uncle Tom's Cabin, things like that, right? So abolitionism is going to become more and more popular in the North. Keep in mind, they have immigrants as a labor source, so they don't require slavery, and so they feel morally superior to the Southerners who still rely on brutal slave conditions. Nativism, like I said, is going to expand with that Know Nothing Party. Anti-immigration sentiment is going to become very common. We also see the Underground Railroad, where slaves are going to be snuck up to northern states to be set free, up to Canada, even British Canada, where slavery is not legal. Okay. Now, this is not a literal railroad, as you guys know, but this is a chain of like houses and groups of people who are abolitionists, and so they're willing to help these runaway slaves, give them a place to sleep, give them food, water, supplies, so that they can kind of follow this trail of abolitionist people up to freedom. We also have an event, Bleeding Sumner in 1856, which just shows sectional violence in Congress, right? We have a Southern congressman beat Sumner with his cane famously in actual American Congress, so that shows you how tense things are at this time, so know that as well. We see the compromise is not working. We see sectionalism increasing through all these steps, obviously, culturally, economically, politically as well. A little bit of tech going on here. We have the telephone by Alexander Graham Bell. Very important to note that. We have the Knights of Labor, 1869, which is going to show a rise of unions. Okay, so again, we kind of see a progressive element rising in America during this unit as well. Okay, with the Knights of Labor and unions. During this unit, how is the federal government and its relationship with the states and individuals evolving? First off, the federal government is going to gain a ton of power during this time. They are going to use that power to develop the West, right? They're going to pass those railroad acts, they're going to pass the Homestead Act, and they are going to get the West developed. If you asked Thomas Jefferson if the federal government should be doing things like that, he would say definitely not, but the federal government, again, is gaining power at this time. We also see southern states. The whole reason for the Civil War is because states in the South don't want to listen to the federal government, right? South Carolina is the first one to secede in 1860, December of 1860. They are going to pull out of America. So the South definitely does not like the federal government telling them what to do. As far as individuals go, during the war, Lincoln is going to pass, or is going to suspend rather, habeas corpus, which basically means that you don't have a right to a trial anymore, okay? Now, he does this to kind of get rid of spies and things like that in the North. That's the idea. It's wartime, so we need to kind of button up, tighten up the hatches, so to speak, and we need to make sure that there are no spies in the North, okay? But obviously, a lot of Americans are going to say, hey, you're just burning up the Constitution, you're abusing your federal power. He's also passing the Emancipation Proclamation, so they see this as him abusing his rights and basically destroying the Charter of American Laws of the Constitution. It's important to note too, I just saw this down here, it reminded me, both the North and the South are going to have drafts, which is kind of an un-American thing to do, right? The federal government forcing men to fight, but that is going to happen as well in the North and the South. So let's summarize this bad boy. Unit 5 turning points. The election of 1860, we have Lincoln getting elected, and that is going to cause South Carolina to secede from the Union, starting the entire Civil War. We have 1865, Lee is going to surrender to the Union at Appomattox, so that is an important turning point when the South surrenders. We have the assassination of Lincoln. John Wilkes Booth will sneak into a theater, as he's an actor, so it gives him special access. He'll sneak into Lincoln's booth, shoot him in the back of the head, jump off the stage, break his legs, or one leg rather. But that's the famous story of the assassination of Lincoln, a big turning point as well. We have the end of Reconstruction in '77, right, with with Hayes getting elected and Congress pulling all those troops out of the South. Now it's important to note that all states are going to be back in the Union by 1877, but if you take a look at a map of the election of 1876, right, just before all the states are back, you can see that the political lines are still pretty clearly drawn between North and South. So even though we fought this whole Civil War, that's not going to fix the sectionalism going on between the North and the South. Now, subperiods, this unit is unique because we have 3 pretty clearly drawn subperiods. The rise of sectionalism and tension up to 1860, where the North, the South, and the West are going to develop their own cultural identities, as the College Board would call it. We have the fighting of the Civil War, 1861 to 65, and then after that we have Reconstruction up until 77, so we have 3 distinct sub-periods. So what is changing and what is continuous throughout this unit? First off, slavery is, in quotes, over. Of course, it's going to continue, but legally, they say that slavery is over. Blacks are going to gain rights on paper, so just like the slavery thing, technically, blacks have equal rights now, but that's not what it looks like in actual practice, so those Reconstruction amendments will be ignored. The federal government is going to gain a ton of power, okay? Basically, one big outcome of the Civil War is that the states are subservient to the federal government. That is established now. They just fought a big war over it, so the federal government is the top dog, and that is solidified. We have nativism or anti-immigration increasing in the North with all those new immigrants, so that's important as well. And industry and urbanization is going to grow in the North as well. We'll get into that with the Gilded Age later. What is continuous? What's staying the same? Women are still fighting for rights. Okay, that is going to continue for a very long time in American history. And of course, blacks are still being oppressed. I didn't put it all here, but sharecropping, not being allowed to vote. So these 2 things are remaining continuous. How would you characterize this bad boy? Okay, what would you name this unit? It's a very interesting unit. It's a fun one. The Civil War, Dred Scott, all that stuff is very exciting material. So what would you call this thing? How would you characterize it in all of U.S. history? What do you guys think? And finally, some cool stuff. Okay, first off, under Civil War, we have Lincoln. Okay, which is a movie about Lincoln and his time during the Civil War, passing the 13th Amendment. Very intense, kind of long, dialogue heavy, so if you're into your history, you might like that. The Conscriptor, I have not seen that, but it's about the Lincoln assassination, so it's got to be interesting. Glory and Gettysburg, both Civil War films. Civil War, oversimplified. Again, I always like these guys. They're good, they're accurate, they're entertaining, so check out Oversimplified. If you want to know about immigration, urbanization, Gangs of New York is good. It's about Irish immigrants and how they're treated in this new urban world in the North, so check that one out. Very, very interesting. So that is Unit 5. I hope you guys are studying, doing your practice DBQs. I'll post a video walking you through that process soon, but give those a shot. It's okay if you don't do well in the first couple of them. They're just practice, so no pressure, but I want everyone to get a 5 on this test, so please be practicing those DBQs. Stay safe, guys. Don't go to Walmart. It's dangerous out there.